Ora entriamo in alcuni mondi, li potete vedere lì, no? C'è la visual art and design, avete visto quello che è successo prima, aerospace, human rights, ed è davvero un onore presentare il prossimo ospite che è arrivato direttamente dal Sudafrica per essere qui con noi. Lo presentiamo con questo video.
Grazie. Thank you very much. Grazie, Cosmano. Thank you very much to you, Cosmano, to the team at Web Market Festival. I think you are doing such a wonderful and a great work in creating a platform where we can come together and we make the future together. Thank you very much to you and the team for the wonderful work that you've been doing. Grazie. Ladies and gentlemen, citizens of the world, I am pleased and honored to be among all of you on this auspicious occasion. It is a great pleasure and an honor for me to come and to be in front of you and address you on some of the few issues that I will talk about, which are currently affecting us as global citizens and in different parts of the world. But of course, before I can engage all of you, I think it would be a misstep if I don't begin by congratulating Italy for being the champions of Europe. With that, I say viva, champions of Europe, viva. I think in the time in which we live in, the times of difficulty, the times of COVID-19, these are uncharted waters that we are currently moving on as the rest of the world. So it would have been a misfortune for me not to say we need to celebrate the little moments of happiness that we get. And for Italy having achieved and worked hard in being the champions of Europe, it is an opportune moment that we celebrate you and we are happy with you. Cosmano, I was sitting patiently and anxious watching the game, and I was hoping and praying that Italy does not lose because I did not want to come and speak to Italians that are sad. So I'm very happy that you are all happy, and I am happy as well. Today I speak to you as a descendant of the House of Mandela, as a South African, as an African, and also as a citizen of the world. I speak to you today just a day before we celebrate Nelson Mandela Day. And in that particular day, which is 18th July, we commemorate and celebrate the role that Nelson Mandela played as an icon of human rights, as a defender of peace and reconciliation, as an advocate for a more equal and just society. We celebrate that day during difficult times, and those are the times of COVID-19. At the time when the rest of the world is battling with a common enemy, and that is COVID-19. It is so unfortunate, citizens of the world, that we all have this one common enemy, but yet we are not united in our fight against COVID-19. I say we have missed an opportunity for the rest of the world to unite and reconcile, and we join forces as we wage a struggle against such an enemy as COVID-19. I say we are not united because if you have observed how the vaccine rollout has been happening globally, we haven't had an equitable way of distributing vaccination. I speak as a descendant of the African continent where almost less than 1.2% of the African population that has been vaccinated. And yet Europe probably has maybe vaccinated over 50% of its population. That speaks into how unequal our world is. And it speaks against the very same values that Nelson Mandela stood for as an agent, as an advocate of social justice, equality, human rights, peace, and reconciliation. It is against that background that I come to you to argue and to appeal to each and every one of you to speak against unequal and skewed distribution of vaccines in the rest of the world. The third world countries, the poor countries, the African continent is suffering because we are unable to access equitable vaccination at the time when we need it the most. When I left South Africa, for instance, our people were dying in numbers. Our people were being infected with coronavirus, battling the Delta variant of COVID-19 in their numbers. And yet, the countries in the European Union, the countries in the West, such as the United States and Britain, who have privilege and access to vaccines, are refusing to release it speedily in order to save us in the African continent and to the rest of those countries that are affected. And I say to the rest of the world, this is a missed opportunity. This is speaking against the values that Nelson Mandela himself stood for, equality. It speaks to the fact that as the world today, despite having a common enemy, we are not united in our fight against that common enemy. As you will be reflecting in the next couple of days on Nelson Mandela Day, I want you to think about how, despite having this common enemy, we are not united in that particular fight. And it also speaks to how we are failing to recognize, defend, and respect human rights. For if one part of the population of the world have an access to such life-saving vaccines, and the other part of our society do not have access to such, it speaks to the gross violations of their human rights. Myself, as a descendant of an advocate of human rights, and myself as a defender of human rights, I say this is the inability for the countries, particularly the European Union, the West, America, and the United Kingdom, their inability to recognize that we have one single enemy, and therefore we must unite in a fight against such. It is a gross violation of human rights. And I would say, boldly and say, the blood of those who are dying in the African continent and in other parts of the world because of inability to access vaccines is in the hands of those countries who have access to such life-saving vaccination. And for me, it is a gross violation of human rights. I am particularly pleased to observe that among this congregant, among the people that are here today, are the younger generations. And I say so because, Mano, one of the missions of the Web Market Festival is that we make the future. Now, if you have a younger generation in the audience, it is indeed an indication that the future is in great hands, for the future is in the hands of the younger generation. The future is in our hands as young people. So therefore, we have a collective responsibility to come together as the younger generation and stand in defense of human rights and advocate for human rights. And when such injustices and gross violations of human rights, as we have observed during this entire time we have been, as the rest of the world, being affected by COVID-19, we have observed gross violations of human rights in a scale that we haven't seen in the world. In most countries, for instance, I'll make examples of my country. When COVID-19 started, the government deployed the military to enforce COVID-19 regulations. But what we have observed was how the government have used the military to abuse the citizens in the name of protecting them against COVID-19. At the time when COVID-19 started, I was in South Sudan, being deployed under the project of Journalists for Human Rights, supported by Global Affairs Canada. One of the things that I've observed there are the inequalities which COVID-19 has exposed because of how unequal the world is. When the rest of the world was going on lockdowns, in South Sudan, we were unable to go on lockdown because it was impossible for people to quarantine at home because the people, one, they were very poor, and two, South Sudan was going through a violent war at the time, as it is still going to this day. And part of the work I was doing in South Sudan under Journalists for Human Rights was to advocate for human rights, one, and two, for media development as a cornerstone of democratization, and three, to defend and advocate for peace in that particular country. And it was evident to me that for those who are living in poor countries, it was near impossible for them to afford staying at home and not being able to go out and look for work in order to support their families. It is again speaking of into how unequal our world is. So to the younger generation, I want to argue to you and say, this is an opportune time for us to indeed make the future, defend human rights, fight for peace, fight for reconciliation, at the time when our leaders in Europe, in Africa, are seeking to divide us using the very same systems that were used during the past. Systems such as racism, systems such as discrimination. What we have observed across the rest of the world, even in Europe, is a rise in the right-wing organizations. Organizations that speaks against immigration. Organizations that seeks to advance an agenda for discrimination, an agenda for racism, which speaks fundamentally against the principles of human rights in general. So, to the younger generation here, the future is in your hands. It is up to you to rise and stand in defense of human rights, in defense of equality, in defense of reconciliation, peace. As you will go out on the 18th of July in celebration of Nelson Mandela Day, I want you to offer at least 67 minutes of your time in doing what is good in society. And with those words, I thank you. Grazie. I thank you very much for attending.
Grazie, grazie a te Siyabulela.
Grazie, grazie.
Per essere arrivato direttamente dal Sudafrica, essere qui con noi.
Grazie.
Microfono? Ok, ce l'ho. Volevo chiederti una cosa, una sola domanda. Probabilmente abbiamo sbagliato qualcosa in questi anni parlando solo e esclusivamente di diritti umani. Mi spiego meglio. Dovremmo forse iniziare a parlare dei doveri umani, di rispettare i singoli diritti? Forse questa può essere un po' la chiave?
Grazie, Cosmano. I fully agree with you.
Sono perfettamente d'accordo con te.
As individuals and citizens of the world, we have a collective responsibility
Come individui e cittadini del mondo abbiamo una responsabilità collettiva
to first respect one another
ed è quella di rispettare l'un l'altro
and also to respect the rights of each and every individuals in the world.
e anche la responsabilità di rispettare ciascun individuo in tutto il mondo.
But what we have seen over the years is that instead of respecting one another as citizens of the world, we discriminate on one another.
Purtroppo quello che abbiamo visto finora nel mondo è che anziché rispettarci l'un l'altro, abbiamo discriminato l'altro.
We allow ourselves to be used by our leaders who perpetuate hate, racism, and ideology of discrimination to divide us.
E ci permettiamo di essere sfruttati dai nostri leader che perpetrano il razzismo, la discriminazione, l'odio e permettiamo loro di dividerci.
And if you observe today, in Europe, in Africa, in the West, we are more divided than we were in the past.
E se guardiamo al giorno d'oggi in Europa, in Africa, nell'Occidente in generale, siamo ancora più divisi di quanto lo fossimo in passato.
But despite that, I am always reminded, Cosmano, of Nelson Mandela when he says, there is no one that is born hating one another.
Però in tutto questo ricordo molto volentieri le parole di Nelson Mandela quando diceva che nessuno è nato con in sé l'odio nei confronti dell'altro.
Hate is something that is learned, so therefore if it can be learned, it also can be unlearned because love comes more naturally than its opposite.
Perché l'odio è qualcosa che ci viene dall'esterno, ci viene prestato, così come ci viene dato dall'esterno può anche essere soppiantato dall'amore, che è più forte, l'amore nei confronti degli altri.
Assolutamente sì, è quello che abbiamo visto
Grazie.
anche ieri con Franco Vaccari nel borgo di Rondine, no? La cittadella della pace, dove io spero che Siyabulela si protrarrà qui in Italia per qualche altro giorno, magari può fare anche un salto, perché il tema è esattamente quello. Come diceva Siyabulela, questa per noi è una piattaforma di costruzione del futuro e siamo davvero contenti che sia salito a bordo anche Siyabulela, con cui continueremo a collaborare esattamente su questo punto, cercare di puntare l'attenzione tanto sul dovere di ognuno di noi di rispettare l'altro. Grazie mille.
Grazie.
Siyabulela, grazie.
Grazie.
A tutti noi.
Grazie. Thank you very much.